Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to make a cold air box for a intake on a 2001 Mazda Miata. If you guys watched my other video on how to make your own DIY racing beat style intake, you'll note that I did say that I would make a cooled air box for this at some point, so it's finally time for that. This part comes stock. It's really just here to hold these relays. But I've already got one of the bolts out where it mounts in, just so I'd have more room for that. But you're basically just going to do one 10mm bolt there and these two there, and they have a nut on the other side. And then you can remount these where you want, but I might throw them back inside the air box. Basically, the point of a cold air box is to stop all the heat from your headers from getting into your air filter and your intake air temperatures. So what I'm basically going to do is make like a box that is fitted to the bottom of the frame there, of the chassis, and it's going to come across there and insulated, and it's going to stop heat from coming in there. I'll do a before and after test just to see how much that'll lower the intake air temperature. Also worth noting that there is a little hole right there that comes from the factory behind the headlight to bring fresh cold air up to it. So this is kind of an ideal spot for an air intake. So with those things removed, you can just lift out this piece. I was kind of using this as like an OEM heat shield for the air intake, but we're going to be making a special air box, so this is going bye-bye. So now you can see these relays sort of just mounted on there. You could just leave them chilling right there, or you could, you know, zip tie them up out of the way or mount them up underneath there or something like that. But now you can sort of see the topography of what we're going to be making here. It's going to be something that's going to connect here, block off the air, come along the bottom there, and come up that little edge and stop right about there or whatever. And I'll show you guys a trick to be able to get it to you know, be close to the hood level once it's closed. So kind of using this as a template, I'm going to cut out some cardboard to get a sort of tentative shape of what we're going to be doing here. So with this thing cut, it's important to note that the long side, or what's going to be facing like up in the car, is the side that has the corrugations on it. That's going to be helpful for the next trick that I'll teach you. So right there, I've got that pretty much to the bottom of the thing, bottom of the car. So now I'm going to figure out where that hole is going to come through and cut a little spot for it. So I pushed pretty hard on this cardboard, and what's nice about cardboard is it leaves an indentation. You can sort of see that circle right there starting at my thumb going around, and that's what I'm going to cut out. So with that hole cut, that's sort of what we're looking at. Now you'll notice that that is not going to close. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut it down to near the level of the thing, and then I've got a little trick. So with this cut down and sort of cut to shape, I mean, I'd like that to be a little bit more square, but that's actually okay. What we're going to do next is you're going to get some skewers or toothpicks, and you're going to stick them in these holes, and then you're going to close the hood, and that's going to give you the topography of the underside of the hood. So what I've done is take each skewer and cut it in half, and then you can take one end of it and just stick it where it needs to go, and then when the hood comes down, it's going to push these down, and that'll let you know where the hood goes. Make special note of, you know, that obviously these aren't going to just push into that and stop. So now we're going to close the hood. And that's what the inside of the hood looks like, apparently. So now we are going to very carefully remove this piece of cardboard and lay it on top of another sheet of cardboard and trace our new roof template there. As you can see, I've made a few relief cutouts for wires and stuff that would have gone through there. I'm going to keep a little bit more material there just so that we get better heat insulation, but basically you're going to trace this new template there. So you can see I have made a new template off of the old one, and this one should fit pretty well in the spot. Make sure to cut a relief for the hood prop. It's more like the semi-finished product here. What I'm going to have to do is add a little bit of electrical tape along the bottom, add some more pieces just to fill in those little gaps there. And yeah, see there's a couple of little gaps. And what I'm going to do is I actually cut this a little bit shorter than what I traced it as, and then what I'm going to do on top is throw some vacuum tube along the top side so that it will sort of seal against the hood and not rattle around and stuff. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to tape on a little L bracket so that I'll have a little mounting point right there, and then I might make something to mount to right there for this mounting point, or maybe to down there, maybe both. Yeah, there's a bunch of little holes around here, so I can make that, but we need to fill in gaps like under there and stuff like that. Alright, so here are the little brackets that I've added. Under each one of these there's a hole or a bolt that it could go into, and those will hold it pretty securely. Picked up a piece of metal. It's a 24 by 36. Paid $9 for it. This is going to be enough for a template for this project and for another project that I'm working on after this. So here I have this template laid out. I'm going to trace it onto this sheet of steel. This is a galvanized steel, so it should have a little bit of protection against rust, but I might end up painting it anyway. So now we're ready to cut that out. So it's always good to use gloves when you're working with steel or metal, sharp edges, and I'm going to be cutting it with some tin snips here. So to fold this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a straight edge, like a piece of wood across there, and I'm going to fold it against that just a little bit at a time, tapping it with a hammer to get a nice sharp edge, otherwise you'll get a wonky edge. I've went ahead and bent this, and now it's really starting to look like a box. Bent out those little L brackets as well. Now you can really see what we're dealing with here. So here's the box kind of in place. Yeah, just got to figure out where that is going to line up. That seems like it's pretty well done. Those will line up on those holes right there. Just got to drill those. That's going to go in that little bracket for the power steering pump, and this one's going to go in. Alright, so the holes are drilled sort of where they're going to line up. Cut a hole for that, and later we're going to go ahead and put some vacuum hose that's cut around there and around the edges, just to seal everything off. Got pretty decent coverage along the bottom too, and the sides and the front. So there it is, bolted in. I just found some bolts in my garage. Actually, if you guys have an unmodified car, you should still have these bolts here. I just lost mine, so I found some in the garage. But basically, yeah, and that's pretty much your box there. And that's going to fit right in there. And you throw the filter on, and your air box. So with the filter installed, I am going to make this hole a little bit bigger, just so we can put some vacuum tube in there. But you can see that blocks off pretty much most of the airflow underneath there. Yeah, and then we just need to make sure the hood closes. So after closing the hood, I can see little areas that are bending, like right there, and the rest seems okay, which means that we're below the surface of the hood. What I've done here is cut open this vacuum tube along its length, just on one side, and I'm going to put this around the inside of this and around any other edges, just to prevent people from cutting themselves and prevent this from wearing through anything. It's a very sharp edge. See, that gives it a much nicer finished edge rather than that, which you could cut yourself on. So here's the finished product. We've got everything bolted down. Got the relays mounted where they need to be. Got plenty of room and protection around everything. It's nice and sealed along the bottom, and along the top of the hood, and this should lower the intake air temperature significantly. So that is how to make an air box for a 2001 Mazda Miata with a DIY Racing Beat style intake. Total cost is about $10 in sheet metal, but I've only used about a third of the sheet metal I got. And about $5 in vacuum tubes, vacuum hose to cut for the edges, as well as probably $2 worth of nuts and bolts if you don't already have them, which you should already have them. And now we move on to testing. So what I'm doing now is adding some header wrap to the outside of this box. Looks really ugly, but if it lowers the temperatures. So I got it all wrapped up. I put a double layer of the insulation on this corner here just because that's what sits closest to the exhaust. And now we'll see if that'll make a difference. Here's another look at the heat insulated box. You can see where I've added a double layer. So right now I am going to go out and do a test with the intake as you see it here. No airbox. Alright, the new and now insulated airbox is in the car, and now I'm going to go do a second test. Using the OBD2 Bluetooth through the Torque app, I was watching the IAT sensor readings, and with the box and without the box there was not a difference in the IAT sensor readings. My theory on that is that the IAT sensor is getting heat soaked because it's outside of the air box and it's very close to the exhaust, so that's the temperature that it's reading, but I still believe that the temperature inside the box is colder than outside the box. So that brings us to this. Using this sort of ghetto air temperature tester, this is the temperature outside of the air box with the probe located here. It's hanging like right outside of this air box, not touching any metal. So now I'm going to move this to like right inside the air box, again not touching any metal. This is the temperature inside the air box. Here is the temperature outside of the air box. The engine is up to temp. Those were the temperatures inside the engine bay while the engine was running at idle. Eventually those two numbers would become the same as the box gets heat soaked, but because there's air flowing through the box, suction through the intake, it did stay a couple of degrees lower, as you saw on those two different readings. The last reading was, I took this test outside of the box again, just sort of to confirm that we had the change. My theory is that because that box is located right behind the headlight, that if we get some actual airflow over the car, it's going to be a much bigger difference in those temperatures. I went on the highway and cruised for about 20 miles with each one of these setups, and used the sensor setup that I have rigged here on the windshield wiper to test the temperatures inside and outside of the box. I tested outside of the box first, giving the air box the worst chance at success because it would be more heat soaked than when I did the first test. My test showed that the temperature outside of the box while cruising at 60 miles an hour maxed out at about 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Then I came to a stoplight and the temperature went up to around 135. I turned around and came back on the same route for about 10 more miles, and the temperature dropped back down to 122. Then I switched the sensor to inside of the box and did the same thing, and the temperature dropped down to around 110. It was between 109 and 111, but it stayed at 110. Came to the same stoplight for its full duration. The temperature only went up to around 127. And then I left and the temperature dropped back down to 110 degrees Fahrenheit again, showing about a 12 degree Fahrenheit drop in temperature inside the box versus outside of the box. But one thing that I'll note is the temperature outside of the box rose very quickly, and then also dissipated very quickly, versus the temperature inside the box definitely like held off the heat for a lot longer. But once the heat was in there, it did take a little bit longer for the box to cool back down to that 110 degrees. In conclusion, I'd say that making this box is totally worth it. Insulating it is totally worth it because the temperature that's around here, around this filter, is like at least 10 degrees lower than the temperature where it would be without this box. As you can see, another look at the air temperature sensor is in the bottom of this elbow, which is like really close to the exhaust. So I'm sure that that sensor is getting heat soaked. And while the ECU might not see the temperature being lower inside the box than it is outside of the box, in reality you are getting colder air, which is giving you more power in the engine.